Ellie, and
Nope. I just like to be on time. There we go.
perfect. There you go.
Great.
Yeah, so to
So,
everybody, just welcome to both Madeline and Eleanor from the Bill Nelems Pain and Research Center. It's a privilege to have her back, and a big thank you to Madeline for finding these amazing guests that we have and for keeping this program, going, and the momentum that she's driven this program with. So thank you very much. And I'm going to turn it over to
mhm.
Madeline to introduce Eleanor. Thank you.
Great. Okay, well, I just want to welcome everybody back to our first webinar of 2024. And I think we have the perfect guest to get us started. We have had Dr. Eleanor Stein on before a couple of times, and it was actually one of you, I think it was one of you that actually alerted me because who had taken one of Ellie's courses and said, this is a person to have on. And so I'm really excited also for our topic tonight, because I have been investigating this over the last year because I've been just fascinated with circadian rhythms and our body clock. I didn't realize how important it was. And so when Eleanor said she was going to talk about this tonight, I thought it's you'll find out how important it is. Anyway, Dr. Eleanor Stein is actually a retired psychiatrist from Calgary, retired, but working harder than ever, as she just said. And from what I understand, is doing a lot of traveling, but also has really dedicated her focus to chronic pain, fibromyalgia, environmental sensitivities, and chronic fatigue. And if you get a chance to look at her website, tells a little bit more about her and also about her own story of recovery. So that being said, and there she's put the links up to, and we'll put them up. She'll put them up again towards the end. Really good stuff. So just her last class that we did in neuroplasticity was the most watched webinar of all our webinars. So the topics that she talks about are so relevant and so practical, and you'll find that out as we go on tonight. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ellie.
Thank you so much, Madeline and Mark. It's really a privilege to talk to your audience. They're receptive. They ask great questions. And as usual, I'm going to save time for questions at the end. So hopefully we can have a great discussion. So I'm going to share my screen and dive right in.
Great.
Just
oh yes, it was Jody that alerted me. Thank you, Jody, for introducing me to Ellie.
I have this problem every time that I lose my sorry, I'm just losing my notes.
A different view, right?
So sorry, you're going to have to edit this. I apologize.
That's okay.
Well, I just try to find. It happens every time, and I always find it eventually.
There's a different view, isn't there?
Yeah, there's a different view. Oh, hold it. There we go. Yes.
Yay.
Okay. You'd think I'd just kind of remember it after the number of times I've presented, right?
Right.
Okay, here we go. So I mentioned to Madeline and Mark before we started recording that since I retired a year ago, I'm actually having so much fun because I'm going back and reviewing stuff that I learned in medical school 40 years ago. I know, hard to believe. And of course, there's so much new science in that time. And so I'm kind of like a kid in a candy store, to be honest. And as Madeline just shared, I too, as I've been reading about circadian rhythm, I got really excited because we have so much influence over our circadian rhythm, and circadian rhythm or body clock is key to health. So when I'm reading stuff, I'm always looking for things that are levers, right? Things that are actionable, things that we can actually make a difference. Like there's a lot of research in my field of fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue syndrome that one can't possibly put into action. It takes computational biology, statistics to even, see the patterns in the data. And so, although it's super fascinating, it doesn't really help people who are suffering right now and need solutions. So circadian rhythm, this talk is one in which I'm going to give you super practical, easy to implement tools that you can start using right away and hopefully see some good results. So I'm going to talk about 5 areas. These are the 5 levers that we have at our disposal to synchronize and strengthen our body clock. Those are the 2 goals: stabilize and strengthen. The research shows, and it's causal research. So a lot of times in medical research, we have what's called correlations, saying A correlates with B, but you don't really know if you change A, will B change or not? Or maybe you change B and A changes. A lot of times we don't know. But in this field of circadian rhythm, we know in animal models and in humans that when people improve their circadian rhythm, make it more stable and stronger, their health improves. And of course, the reverse is true. If we fall off the wagon and start having very inconsistent daily habits, our health suffers as a result. So I want to start with the definition because circadian rhythm is kind of a techie word. Basically, what it is, it's our internal clock that regulates the roughly 24-hour cycle of biological processes in animals and in plants. So all animals and all plants, basically all living creatures, have a built-in body clock. If for some reason we don't have access to the sun, they've done these experiments where they keep people in dark rooms and don't give them any clue about what time it is. Humans' body clock is a little bit longer than 24 hours. It's about 24.25 hours. And so these experimental subjects over time, their cycle gets later and later and later. So what that tells us is if we don't use the tools at our disposal to synchronize our body clock every single day, it's going to get out of kilter, out of synchrony with the sun. The goal is to keep our bodies synchronized with the sun. %80 of people, believe it or not, they've done studies, 80% of people have disrupted body clocks, right? So this is, I'm thinking if that's true for this audience, then this is an area where you could maybe really make some positive changes to your health. So why would people have a disrupted body clock? It's either because they don't or can't keep a consistent schedule. So the take-home message of this whole talk is try to get consistent habits in all of your daily activities as much as possible. So the people that really struggle the most are, of course, shift workers, and also people whose sleep is interrupted by health problems like chronic pain, obviously would be a big one. Children, travel, social activities, and screen time, so use of technology. So until 120 years ago, people rose at dawn and they went to bed within 2 to 3 hours of dusk. So in an equatorial country, this would mean you'd be getting up about 5:30 and you'd maybe go to bed about 8:30 or 9. Our bodies evolved, so all animals and plants evolved to use the sun as this signal for when it's day and when it's night. And our bodies expect that. They expect to have light during the day and dark at night. They expect us to eat during the day and fast at night. Our bodies expect us to be more active in the day and to be resting or sleeping at night. And the more we can give our bodies what they expect, the better they are going to function. So most people, and I am totally included in this, grossly underestimate the health impacts of not keeping to a schedule. An irregular schedule pretty much causes every health problem you can think of because, as you're going to see in the next couple of slides, an irregular schedule messes up the function of every single cell in the body. One of the experts in circadian rhythm, and I've got a couple links to his work at the end of the presentation. His name is Dr. Sachin Panda. He's the researcher who discovered some aspects of how the body clock works. And he calls a weak circadian rhythm the mother of all maladies. And like I said before, the research shows that it's causal. So if we mess up our body clock for whatever reason, health goes down. And it's so well proven that it's no longer ethical to do those experiments. So no one is ever again going to be able to do an experiment in which they purposely disrupt people's body clock to see what happens, because we know the outcome is going to be bad. So here's some of the health problems that result from a weak circadian rhythm. Learning, so a lot of cognitive problems. We all know how difficult it is to think clearly with inadequate sleep. Cardiovascular disease, obesity, diabetes, metabolic syndrome, even something like infertility, all the mental health disorders you can imagine, leaky gut, heartburn, weak immune system, and cancer. So that's a lot of problems. Before I go on, I'm going to give you a little assessment so that you can see for yourself whether working on your circadian rhythm may be something that you want to do, because you could see that you could make an improvement. So I have 7 questions. I'm going to ask you to estimate for the past week your answers to these questions. So the first question is, what time did you wake up? So I want you to write down a number, but also to write down the range. So say your average wake up time was 8 o'clock. It makes a big difference whether your range is from 7:30 to 8 and you always wake within that time frame, or whether your range is from 6 to 9. So write the number, when did you typically wake up in the past week, and then the range, the earliest and the latest number. Number 2, did you wake up with or without an alarm? This indicates whether you were getting enough sleep. So if you got enough sleep, your body will wake up naturally, and you will wake up before your alarm. What time did you go to sleep? So again, write down your average number and then write down your range, your earliest and latest bedtime, meaning what time you got into bed, of not necessarily, let me think, what time did you go to sleep? Well, there's 2 answers to this question. There's kind of when you went to bed to try to start sleeping, and then maybe a different number might be when you actually fell asleep. But for both, try to write also the range. What time did you take your first bite or sip of the day? So basically your first calorie by mouth. And again, the average time and the range. What time did you take your last calorie of the day? The average and the range. What time did you shut off all your screens? The average and the range. And then what time did you exercise? So keep all of these questions in mind as I go through the next slide. So if you answered yes to any of these questions, you can improve your health. There is hope. So this is a good news talk. So if any of your answers, the range for those numbers, vary by 2 or more hours over the course of the past week, and you can improve that and make it more consistent, it could help your health improve. If you're sleeping fewer than 7 hours a night, and You can do some of the strategies I'm going to share with you and sleep a bit longer. That could improve your health. If your digestive system is on call more than 12 hours a day, meaning, so say you woke up at 8 a.m., your first bite of the day was at 8 a.m., and your last calorie, because you can eat or drink calories, was after 8 p.m., that means your digestive system is working for longer than 12 hours, and this has negative health consequences. So that's another area where people could make changes. And then if there's fewer than 3 hours between your last calorie of the day and when you go to bed, that's another area where there's potential for improvement. So just kind of keep that in mind. If you answered yes to any of these, then listen up, because there is hope. So I'm going to just explain a little bit about light. So remember those 5 areas I'm going to talk about. Let's see if I can remember them. Light, eating, exercise, sleep, and temperature. So I'm starting with light. So circadian rhythm is based on the day and night cycle of the sun. Light comes into our eyes. It interacts with a protein at the back of the eye called melanopsin. You can see it in the diagram. Melanopsin, when activated, sends signals to a place in the hypothalamus called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or SCN. The hypothalamus is the command center for all the most important physiological functions of the body, things like hunger, sleep, fluid balance, and the stress response, to name just a few. So light coming into our eyes sets the suprachiasmatic nucleus each day. Unfortunately, you can't rest on your laurels. If any of you watch some of my video tips, I've got one called Don't Rest on Your Laurels, and that is really true for circadian rhythm. If you kept a very consistent schedule for years, and then for a couple weeks it's very disrupted, unfortunately, you can't pay it forward, right? So we have to set our circadian rhythm every single day. The suprachiasmatic nucleus sets the body clock for the brain. So all of our cognitive and nervous functions depend upon sunlight coming into our eyes each morning. Now, when I listen to Andrew Huberman, some of you know him, he has a really awesome podcast. He's a neuroscientist at Stanford, and he always laughs because someone always asks the question, does the light have to come into your eyes? Can't I wear sunglasses and go outside and have the light come onto my skin? And the answer is no, that will not work. It has to come into your eyes. Now, you don't want to stare at the sun. That's bad for your retina. But you want to be out in the sunlight without sunglasses for at least 10 minutes. First thing in the morning, that's what's going to set your clock. The rest of the body also has their own clocks, and they're set by a combination of signals from the suprachiasmatic nucleus and also the timing of eating. Now, what I was really surprised to learn is that, like in this image, every body system, organ, cell, and even gene has its own body clock, its own little inner clock. And they're all independent. And the only way that all these genes, cells, organs, and body systems can work together is if we keep a consistent schedule and set all of those clocks at the same time every day. So these clocks are in constant interaction with our exposure to light, sleep, food, temperature, and activity. They're constantly monitoring. Even more fascinating, our daily habits are stored in epigenetic marks. So what does that mean? We have our genes, but clearly we don't want them all turned on at the same time, right? That would be a disaster. If you have the genes for resting and activity on at the same time, the body wouldn't know what to do. So we have these ways of controlling which genes we need in any given moment, and that's called epigenetics. Our daily habits are stored, that memory is stored in these epigenetic marks, things like DNA methylation. So if we keep a regular habit, we will actually create epigenetic marks that will create a little bit of a memory. So we can rest on our laurels for maybe a few days or even a few weeks. If we change our habits, the clocks in each of these body systems, organ cells, and genes will change. And apparently it takes about 12 weeks to make this shift. So if after tonight's talk, you're like, okay, I can make an improvement and and you maybe write a list down of some of the things that you're gonna try, be patient because it may take 12 weeks for your epigenetics to change and encode and memorize your new patterns. So it won't happen right away. So the goal of using light is to replicate nature, right? Pretend you're a Stone Age person. You have no electric lights. You have no doors, no windows. When the sun is up, you're being exposed to light. And when the sun is down, you're in darkness. So the strategy is, or the recommendation is, expose yourself to bright outdoor light, ideally for about 10 to 15 minutes soon after sunrise, as soon as possible after sunrise, because you're trying to pretend you're a cave person. If you're someone with an indoor job, try to get outside for at least an hour a day, even if it's cold, even if it's rainy, even if it's overcast, as you're going to see on the next slide. For the 3 hours before bed, because our ancestors used to go to bed at about 8 or 9 o'clock. Most of us go to bed around maybe 10 to midnight. That means we have a couple of hours where really we should be in dark. That's what our bodies would prefer, but we're not. And so we want to try to mimic that darkness by using task lighting, meaning the light is shining on the activity we're doing and not in our face. Especially if you're watching or working on screens before bed, blue light blocking glasses are extremely helpful. And I've got a little picture of them in a future slide. And if you're, people really vary in how sensitive to light they are. So the reason light is a problem is because it turns off melatonin production, and we need melatonin to get into a deep sleep. So if you're very light sensitive, you may actually want to change out some of the light bulbs in your bedside lamp and in the bathroom you use at night for red or amber colored bulbs, so that you won't turn off melatonin production if you get up. Now, a big question is about devices. When I first started looking into this topic, most people said it was the blue light from the devices that were turning off melatonin and causing sleep problems and circadian rhythm disruption. But now there's a little bit of a more nuanced belief, which I've heard, which is, yes, the blue light does have an effect, but it's also the stress involved with the devices. I do not use social media at all, but apparently it's quite stressful. And they've done studies that show that if you have your phone with you in your bedroom, even though you're not looking at it, you're subconsciously thinking about, should I check my email? Should I check my Facebook, etc. And that increases stress, which increases adrenaline, which disrupts sleep. So it's not only the light from the device, but it may be the anxiety producing habit of being on the device. So I talked about the brightness of light. So many people ask, do I have to go outside in the morning? Can I just sit next to a window? The answer is you have to go outside. Why? Because the brightest indoor space, just trying to get my pointer here, you can see in the middle of this chart, is between 200 and 1,000 lux. The dullest outdoor light in shade is 10,000. That's 10 times as bright. So there's no possible way you can expose yourself to as much light inside as you can outside, even on an overcast day. Now, the only potential exception to this is people who use a SAD light, seasonal affective disorder. Any of you who use that know that those are kind of mandated to give out 10,000 lux. So a SAD light, which is incredibly bright, almost blinding, is actually at the very bottom end of the amount of light your eyes would see if you were outside. So really important to get outside. Since I've learned this information, I now often take a morning walk just to get that light. So now I'm going to shift from light to eating. When we eat...
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah, absolutely.
The question, what is lux?
Oh, it's just a measurement of the brightness of light.
Okay,
so I can't really...
the term that's used.
Yeah, it's like, you know, inches and feet and kilometers are measures of length. Lux is a measure of the brightness of light.
Right.
So if any of you know a SAD light, like I've got one sitting in front of me and it's really, really bright, and that's 10,000 lux.
10,000.
So that chart kind of gives you, you know, a bit of a sense, like if you're in the supermarket, that's 750 lux. So you kind of have an idea of how bright that is.
Yeah, yeah. And also the difference between those activities and actually being outside is huge.
Dramatic. Yeah, that's why I put the chart up, because people just say, like, I get asked this all the time, can't I just sit by the window? You can, but it won't work.
Right, right.
You'll be comfortable, but your circadian rhythm won't be synced for the day. So thanks for jumping in there. And if you have any other questions, please go ahead. So when we eat, it has two main effects. One is syncing our body clock. So when we eat, all of those little clocks in our body think to themselves, oh, it must be daytime. And then the other one, which is a little bit off topic, but very, very important, is that it enhances health through something called nutrient sensing. So this is kind of connected with the body clock, because how does the clock know that we've eaten? It knows because we have these nutrient sensors in our cells that are in our body, that are constantly measuring how much carbohydrate, fat, and protein is traveling around in our bloodstream. And so if the amount is high, meaning we've just eaten, all the little clocks in all the cells go, oh, it's daytime, and they rev up to be ready to digest and utilize that food to build new molecules and perform functions. And if the amount of nutrients flowing through the blood is low, they go, oh, it must be nighttime, and they kind of go into rest and repair mode. Now, eating is really, really important for chronic pain, because if we don't synchronize our eating with the sun, it actually leads to increased inflammation. And I'll talk a little bit about how that works. So our bodies expect to eat during the day at certain times. The body prepares for this and functions better if we keep to our expected schedule. So if we have a habit of eating breakfast every day at 8 a.m., our body remembers this through those epigenetic marks, and all our digestive juices start flowing before 8 a.m. in anticipation of eating. So if on that day we eat at 6 a.m., our body's not ready. And if we eat at 10 a.m., the peak of all that digestive function has already passed, and it's kind of being wasted. Now, even more startling, the microbiome, the 100 billion bacteria that live in our bowel, also have their own little body clocks, and they also expect to be fed at a certain time of day, and they don't expect to be fed in the night.
That's a lot of clocks.
That's a lot of clocks. So we're talking hundreds of billions. Every gene in every cell has its own clock. Can you imagine?
Wow.
And they've done studies, like it's kind of mind-blowing.
Wow. It is.
So eating too late in the day is probably the biggest common error that people make. I am totally guilty of this one myself. It's one of my biggest circadian struggles. So if we eat too late in the day, the food digests and moves slowly because our body, our peristalsis, the muscle contractions that move food through the bowel, are not ready. They're going, it's nighttime, hello, and they're not fully functioning. The first bite we eat each morning sets all of the clocks. So that breakfast time should be as consistent as possible.
Ellie, can I ask a question there?
Yeah.
Because
Mhm.
when you say like the first bite you take of the day, does that include coffee, tea? Like, does it include anything being
The first
digested or just
calorie.
solid food?
The first
first
calorie. It
calorie,
doesn't
so
matter if it's solid or liquid. So
okay.
if you drink coffee with no sugar or milk, there's no calories. So that doesn't count.
Okay, the first calorie.
The first
Got
calorie.
it.
But if you drink, I don't know, I'm not a coffee drinker, but if you drink one of those Starbucks lattes with numerous items added, that would count.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's a great question. If you eat too late in the day, the body produces more acid. I guess it kind of panics and it's like, oh my gosh, what's happening? Produce as acid, and people get more heartburn. If you eat the same exact meal earlier in the day, the blood sugar will not go as high and less insulin will be produced than if you eat that exact same meal later in the day. So for people that are struggling with blood sugar and diabetes, the timing of eating could be extremely helpful. If we eat later in the day, because the intestines are not really ready to receive that food, they're not expecting it, and because it means that they have less time to repair at night, because night is when most of the body systems do repair, it leads to leaky gut, which leads to inflammation. So for people with chronic pain, the timing of eating could make a surprising difference. And the microbiome also needs to rest at night. And if we don't give it a break, we're more likely to get dysbiosis, which also leads to leaky gut. So eating too much, too often, or too late causes health problems because of the insulin release. Insulin, I was surprised to learn, actually causes us to store more fat. So people with diabetes sometimes have to take insulin, but it makes it almost impossible for them to lose weight. So they get into a bit of a vicious circle. As long as we're eating, our bodies are in fat storing mode. So again, they've done studies where they feed people the exact same food at different times of day, and the people who eat in the evening or night gain more weight and are more likely to develop diabetes, even though they're eating the exact same food. So Dr. Panda says, and he's done studies to back this up, you know, everybody argues what is the best diet for health and weight loss. And he said he thinks the timing of when we eat could be more important than our food choices, with a few exceptions. Like obviously, if you eat junk food, that's a poor choice. But assuming you're eating a relatively healthy diet, the timing may be much more important than the food choices. We only begin burning fat for energy instead of storing it if we fasted for more than 6 hours. And we only kick into major fat burning mode if we're fasted for 12 hours. Yet research shows that only 10% of North Americans give their digestive system a 12-hour break. And most people eat 6 to 8 times in each 24-hour period instead of the 3 meals a day. And apparently, our parents were all correct. 3 meals a day is the healthiest way. So again, they've done these studies where they give people 3 larger meals versus grazing versus meals plus snacks. And the people who eat the 3 larger meals are healthier in a whole bunch of ways than the people who are grazing. So this is
Ellie, I've got a couple of questions there. Do you mind if we pause for a
no,
couple
not at all.
questions?
Go ahead.
Okay, yes, because I might not find them later. That is so interesting. This whole thing about 6 small meals was
Because
quite the
aren't we
thing
all
for
told that to do
quite a
that?
while.
Yes.
Now, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So Richard just wants to know what is meant by eating later in the day. Later meaning evening
Eating,
or
eating later means eating within 3 hours of bedtime.
okay, that period of time, because
Yeah.
obviously everybody's got their own schedule.
Yeah.
And does intermittent fasting factor into this?
Yeah. I'm 2 slides that you're 2 slides ahead of me.
You're okay.
Yeah.
Ina's ahead of us. How does all of this affect midnight workers? Oh, yeah, this is what you started off saying, like obviously shift workers are going to struggle the most.
Yeah. So Dr. Panda is really interested in shift workers, and he lives in San Diego, and he did a study with the San Diego Fire Department, right? Because they all work shifts. And these are healthy people. So these are not like almost nobody of those research participants had diabetes or high blood pressure, anything like that. They're a real healthily selected group. And he tried to see whether it was practical for them to create a 12-hour eating window despite their shift work. So that was the only goal. He didn't tell them when to eat. He didn't tell them how much to eat, and he didn't tell them what to eat. He just gave them the instruction and guidance to look at all their shifts and figure out when they could eat and stay within a 12-hour window. And they could pick any time they wanted. And the people that managed to stay within the 12-hour window, I can't remember the duration of the study. It was a couple of months, and they all had significant health benefits, and they were already healthy.
And is it the same 12-hour window? Obviously,
yes, that's the thing.
Like,
so that's the challenge. If
yeah.
you're sometimes working nights and then sometimes not, and you want to be up in the day with your family, you got to put a little bit of, like, I've never been in that position, because when I work nights, I just ate all the time.
Right.
Before I learned any of this. So it's like you have to kind of think of your schedule and think, okay, when could I eat? Ideally, the eating would be during the day, but apparently the consistency is even more important than the timing.
Okay, that is so interesting. Thanks for that. Who would have
thought? You're welcome.
Yeah.
So this is, I'll just say about this slide, this is the bad things that happen if you're unable to stabilize your circadian rhythm with respect to eating. So now I'm going to talk about something called time-restricted eating, which is a little bit related, but slightly different than intermittent fasting. So it's been known for a really long time that if humans and all animals, even yeast, if they're calorie restricted to about 30% fewer calories than what they normally eat, health and lifespan improves dramatically. And again, this study's been done a ton of times in multiple species, so it seems very solid. Now, if you're anything like me, you're never going to be able to stick to a diet in which you're constantly hungry. So people were searching for ways in which we could have the benefits of caloric restriction without the pain. And this is where the idea of time-restricted eating has come from. So most of the research on time-restricted eating has been done in mice because, of course, their diets can be precisely controlled. But there have been a number of human studies that show similar findings. So here's how it works. Time-restricted eating means to try to contain your eating to a window which is at the very most 12 hours, right? So 12 hours of eating and 12 hours of fasting. Now, probably for most adults who don't have maybe some other health problem that would interfere, a fasting window of 14 hours is probably ideal, which means you would contain your eating time to within 10 hours. But Dr. Panda says, 90% of North Americans are not even meeting the 12 hours. So he's a very practical man. And he says, you know what, 12 hours would be amazing for most of us. And it's pretty easy. Even I can do it. So if I can do it,
I would just have to
people can
sleep.
do it.
I'd have to sleep until about 10 o'clock.
Yes. So what I do is I try to, whatever time I finish eating at night, because that's the area where I have a personal challenge, I just don't eat again for 12 hours. And that part I find actually pretty easy. And many days I can go longer, like 14, even 15 hours. He emphasizes that time-restricted eating is of 12 hours is safe for almost everyone, even children. So it's a great, for any of you who have kids, it's a really great lifestyle to teach your children, and it's totally safe. And the other benefit is it can be combined with any eating plan. So if you're a carnivore, a vegetarian, a paleo, a keto, a gluten-free, it doesn't matter. Any of those diet plans that are, your choice, you can combine with time-restricted eating. So my suggestion is to start with a 12-hour window because it's doable for most people. The earlier in the day you have that window, meaning the closer to sunrise that you have your first meal of the day, the better. Not so much that starting eating earlier is better, although that does help set your body clock, right? The light sets your brain clock and eating sets your body clock. But it also means, say, if you were going to start eating at 6 a.m., it means you have to finish eating by 6 p.m., which is actually more important because it gives your body and your brain a nice window to get all of that food digested before you fall asleep. Why is that important? Because when we're in deep sleep, a recently discovered body system called the glymphatics starts acting to empty all of the garbage in our brains. So we have this thing called the blood-brain barrier. That means it's hard for molecules to get in and out of the brain. And it was only discovered in 2013 by a scientist in, I can't remember if it's Norway or Sweden. I recently heard her talk. She gave an outstanding talk at a chronic fatigue syndrome conference, which was super exciting. So basically, if we still have food in our system when we're in deep sleep, and deep sleep happens at the start of the night, the glymphatics just don't work. We have to be asleep. It's a whole complicated neurotransmitter, noradrenaline pulses, which changes the pressure of the little arteries in the brain, which pushes the solute out into the glymphatics, and then it's drained out through the cerebral spinal fluid. So we have to get deep sleep for that to work, and we have to not have a ton of food in our system. So that's why it's important to finish eating 2 or optimally 3 hours before bedtime. So time-restricted eating, people refer to it as the 3-12, meaning stop eating 3 hours before bed and then don't eat again for 12 hours. And as I said, aim for 2 to 3 larger meals in the day rather than grazing. That will be like the cherry on top. So I'm moving on to activity. Circadian rhythm and activity or exercise have this reciprocal relationship. So if our circadian rhythm is...
Sorry, Ellie.
Sorry?
Can I just ask one question before we move on from digestion and food? Sorry, might as well get it now while we're talking about food.
No, it's totally funny.
Thanks. Jaspreet says earlier it was mentioned digestion starts after 6 hours of fasting. Is that
no
right?
After 6 hours of fasting, we start burning a tiny bit of fat. So as long as we're eating, we don't burn any fat. We burn the carbohydrates that we've just eaten. and we burn the protein. So if we're eating a ton of protein and not so much carbohydrate is the first food of choice. So any carbohydrate, fruit, vegetables, starches, grains, those are all carbs. That's what we're going to burn. And as long as we have glucose running around in our bloodstream, we're going to store the extra glucose. It's going to trigger insulin released from the pancreas. That's going to store those carbohydrates as fat, the extra that we haven't used. So only after a minimum, and that's really a bare minimum of 6 hours, is there any possibility to start using some of that fat that we stored for a rainy day or a rainy hour.
Got it. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
So and that's
that
another
sense,
reason fasting 12 hours is so important. Even after 12 hours, most people are not in ketosis, but at least we're not building more glucose and more insulin. That's a whole other talk.
Right.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So back to this reciprocal relationship between activity and circadian rhythm. If we have a strong, consistent circadian rhythm, we actually benefit more from the activity that we do than if it's not as strong. And conversely, exercise helps build the strength of the body clock. So it is causal in both directions. So there's been research that shows if we do the same amount of exercise, either strength or endurance exercise, the benefits are greater in people that have a stable body clock. More lubricant is produced by our cartilage in our joints, so that would be of interest to people who have pain from arthritis. We have better bone health, less osteoporosis if our circadian rhythm is consistent, and better motor coordination. Like, who would even guess that?
Wow. Okay.
The other side is also true. I wish I had a downward dog that looked that fantastic. If we do physical activity, as you're going to see in a later slide, physical activity alerts us and tells our brain and our body that it's daytime. It allows us to sleep better at night. It reduces our appetite. So there's a big connection between these nutrient sensing pathways and activity. And it helps glucose get taken up into our muscles. So in a metabolically healthy person, we eat carbohydrates, it gets broken down into blood sugar, which is another word for glucose. And ideally, we would use most of that glucose through activity, through muscle activity throughout the day, so that by the time we get to evening, we don't have too much glucose in our blood. Otherwise, our pancreas is going to have to fire up the insulin because it's dangerous for us to have too much glucose in our blood. And then we're going to move that glucose into cells and it's going to be converted into fat and stored for later.
Right.
Circadian rhythm helps us utilize that glucose.
That's a good question. Does that mean that exercising is, is that what you're just about to say? Yes. Okay, never mind. These guys are ahead.
So activity before breakfast is good. Activity earlier in the day helps you set that body clock. And when the body clock is consistent and strong, we're actually going to burn more fat from the same amount of exertion. So, you know, when people say a calorie is a calorie is a calorie, totally false. That has been totally debunked. That's a whole other talk, but there's many ways in which we utilize the calories we take in differently depending on things like circadian rhythm and activity. Especially for people who have some metabolic challenges, meaning you're pre-diabetic or diabetic, a walk after dinner, it doesn't have to be fast or vigorous, but just even a gentle walk after dinner is going to help you take up some of that blood sugar into the muscles, and it's going to help your metabolic issue. Ideally, you're going to combine strategies and do your morning activity outside so that you're also getting exposure to sunlight. And it's been shown that if you combine time-restricted eating and endurance activities, you get more out of both. So again, there's this two-way relationship. Okay, sleep. This is a little bit of review, so I'm going to go through this a little bit faster because I'm also noticing the time. So sleep is important for circadian rhythm, right? The things I've just talked about, light, eating, and activity, all increase our alertness and give our brain and body the message that it's daytime. Sleep, lying down, resting with eyes and ears closed, gives all of those little internal clocks the message that it's nighttime. And for a whole bunch of reasons, if we get too little sleep, it causes a ton of health problems, a lot of the same ones as poor circadian rhythm. And in part, or in general, it's because we do repair and renewal at night. And if we don't have enough sleep, that repair doesn't happen. The metabolic problems increase because of the higher blood sugar and insulin. And our microbiome isn't working optimally. Not to mention that we're more likely to die because the rate of car accidents goes up, right? Because we have cognitive dysfunction if we don't get enough sleep. And in kids, that can look like poor school performance and decreased immune function, which leads to higher cancer. They've done studies showing that people who have better sleep respond better to vaccines and were less likely to get COVID, for example.
Wow.
So very quickly, some sleep tips. Oh, right. People have different problems, which have different potential solutions. So there could be trouble falling asleep, trouble getting back to sleep if you wake up, trouble waking too often, and trouble waking too early. So depending which problem you have, the solution might be slightly different. So for every hour that we stay awake, we need 20 to 30 minutes of sleep. So this means for someone who's awake for 16 hours, in the ideal world, you get about 7 to 8 hours of sleep. And that's about what we estimate pre-industrial societies got. And we are really messed up by our access to artificial light. And there's a ton of research showing that's when things started going downhill. And there's a really cool study that a sleep researcher did. He took all of his students camping for the weekend, and they all went to sleep at 9 o'clock. I've been traveling a lot in my camper van, and by 9 o'clock, everybody's like, it's quiet in the campground and everybody's asleep because the sun has gone down. And without a lot of distractions from devices, there's nothing to do. Your body naturally calms and wants to sleep. It's quite striking. So goals around sleep. Some of this is review. Wake up at the same time every day, ideally when the sun gets up, ideally without an alarm, meaning you went to bed early enough that you've had the sleep that you need. Get outside first thing in the morning to get that sunlight in your eyes and get enough activity. This is a picture of the beautiful blue light blocking glasses. They actually really work. I have 2 pairs, one in my bedroom and one near my TV, and I use them every single day. Again, it's all about giving your body and brain the message of what you want it to do. Is it day or is it night? So don't be eating because then your body is going to think it's daytime. Go to sleep within 3 hours of sunset. Can you imagine? So I have a friend who decided she was not going to use any artificial light, and she lasted a couple months. And without devices or light in the evening, she started falling asleep around 8 o'clock.
Oh.
But she, you can't last because you want to do stuff in the evening, right?
Yeah.
Now, melatonin is a pretty safe tool to use, but a lot of people use too much. 1 milligram is already more than what our bodies naturally produce. So for most people, 1 milligram of melatonin 2 to 3 hours before bed. Again, this is to simulate sunset, right? So in a pre-industrial society, when the sun went down, there was no more light and the body starts producing melatonin. So if we give ourselves exogenous melatonin, and you do it at bedtime, it won't work. You have to give your body a little bit of warning that night is coming. Now, the last topic, the last topic is temperature, and this is really a really cool tool. So many people instinctively know that if they take a hot bath before bed, it relaxes them. And they think it's because of the heat, and it is, but with a bit of a twist. So if you take a hot bath, it heats up your body. As soon as you get out of the bath, your body starts cooling down. And that reflects what happens in a pre-industrial society at night, right? People are sleeping in the cave and it gets cold at night and their bodies cool down. So the research shows that in a cooler environment, we sleep better. And so a really simple tip, and most people already do this to try to save some money on their heating bill, is to keep the room temperature below 20 degrees at night. I myself sleep at about 17.5 degrees. And you can have a duvet on. So it's not like you have to be lying there shivering. It's really, I don't really understand how it works. Even if you have a warm duvet, apparently maybe just the coldness on your hands and your face are enough to give your body the message that it's nighttime. So we're wrapping up here. Not only should you consider having regular habits to strengthen and stabilize your circadian rhythm, but you can use these same tools to try to increase alertness or increase calm when you want or need to. So for example, when you expose yourself to light, it's going to increase alertness. So if you're someone who sleeps in too late and you want to shift your body clock a bit earlier, you want to get up early and expose yourself to light early in the day. But say you're an older person, and older people, their body clock tends to shift earlier and maybe they want to stay up a bit later, then they might be advised to expose themselves to light in the late afternoon to kind of reset their clock that it's still daytime. Exercise, same thing. If you want to increase alertness, exercise is a good strategy unless you have myalgic encephalomyelitis and post-exertional malaise, in which case it might crash you. So people without that condition or without long COVID, exercise is a really great strategy to increase alertness. And many of you know that if you exercise vigorously, you get this endorphin rush. And then after the exercise, you feel really calm and you have a sense of well-being. So that's also why people who exercise tend to sleep better. Eating. If you want to maintain alertness, believe it or not, it's better not to eat. So if you fast, say you have a big presentation at noon, you might want to fast or eat a keto meal. A keto meal means more fat, less carbs, so that you maintain your cognitive alertness, as opposed to a carbohydrate meal, which tends to increase calmness. So some people strategize that they eat more fat and protein during the day to maintain their cognitive alertness. And then their last meal of the day is a bit heavier on carbs so that they're calmer and can sleep. And lastly, a cold bath or a cold plunge will definitely increase alertness. I've tried it many times. And a hot bath or shower, as I've mentioned, will help calm you. So I'm going to finish with a couple resources. Dr. Panda has created a free app called My Circadian Clock. It's a really great app. You enter all of your data into it, especially like your sleep times, your eating times, your exercise times, and then it gives you tips on how you can improve your circadian rhythm. This is his book. It's, a little heavy duty. So I would say the keeners among you will really love it. Some of you may just want to read the abbreviated notes. And he's also all over YouTube. He's done a ton of great interviews. This is one of the most recent ones that has some of the research that I shared with you today. So in conclusion, number one, keep a regular schedule. Number two, try to sync that schedule with the sun. Use these 5 levers to keep your schedule consistent: light, time-restricted eating, exercise, sleep, and temperature. And remember that better circadian rhythm really is strongly associated with better health. If you're interested, I have some additional information more on the topic of sleep than on circadian rhythm per se, and it's at this link. So my website, and then Nelems-Jan-2024. So if you go to that link, you'll be asked for your name and your email address so that we can send you a free handout, which was finished late last night. So if you find any typos, please let me know. It's pretty hot off the press. And I just wanted to let you all know that in my retirement, working harder than ever, I've decided I'm going to offer live information sessions where I'm going to share topics like this and other things that are relevant for people with chronic diseases, including chronic pain. So all kind of things about heart disease, cholesterol, how chronic disease works, how we can trigger the healing cycle, what are the 12 hallmarks of aging. So interestingly enough, aging and chronic disease have a lot of the same biological characteristics, and the aging field is, or the longevity field, is way ahead of the chronic illness field in learning, identifying self-management strategies that are 0 to low cost that we can all implement, similar to the strategies that I've shared with you today, right? Things that are free and practical that most people can implement. So those are 2 links that you might want to check out. Oh, obviously my animation was a bit off there. And that's it. I'm going to stop sharing. So I'm so sorry. I think I took a bit of time, but I'm happy to answer questions if people are
I have a feeling there was so much good stuff in there that I'm going to have to watch it again. I'm so glad that I've recorded. I'm sure there's probably a lot of questions, but that was a lot of really great information that we can start doing now.
What I love about it, it's so practical, right?
So practical.
Maybe some people like me really struggle with not eating before bed, but I can use the other strategies, right? So you don't have to be perfect. That's the other take-home message with self-management, is that any little improvement that you make is a baby step in the right direction. And then maybe a month or 2 from now, you might say, okay, I've got this one down. What else can I add? And you kind of layer it. And slowly over time, you know, for those of you who don't know my story, I got sick in 1989, which is a really long time ago. I struggled and struggled and struggled and tried so many things. And finally in 2017, I had this big improvement. And my best guess is that I just didn't give up. And I just kept layering. Every time I learned a new strategy, I would try it. And I finally got the right combo.
Geez, that's a long time. Yeah. But I think similar to a lot of people here, you know, so I think that's really great advice to layer it, try one little thing at a time. And I'll just share that there was a period of time where I still tried to stop eating at 6 o'clock at night because I just learned this.
Yeah.
And I cannot tell you how that one, it wasn't easy. I still don't do it all the time now, how much better I felt in the morning. I couldn't believe the difference in, and
it's
anyway.
So true. The days I do it, I just wake up feeling good and ready to go.
Yes. Like it really does work.
So I just see one question from Nicole. Does it work with ME? Absolutely. Like, these are strategies that I'm not saying everyone can do every strategy because we all have our individual barriers, let's say, but absolutely I think anyone with any chronic disease, it's worth trying as many as you can, one at a time. Don't do them all at once, please.
No,
Mhm.
all the perfectionists out there,
Yes.
put your
Please
perfectionist
don't do
aside.
that.
Yeah, don't
Yeah,
do that
thank
to
you, Ellie.
yourself.
That was an amazing
You're
presentation. There's a lot
welcome.
of information there. Really good, really relevant, and really, really applicable to so much of our lives.
I'm
Thank you.
wondering, Madeline, if you also want to put the link to your video page. I
Oh,
noticed you
on the
asked about it.
website?
Yeah, in the chat.
Yeah, yeah. So I will, to everybody that's registered, I'll send out the recording for you to have. You'll have the link. If that happens to go missing, all of our recordings are also up at the Bill Nelems website under past webinars. So you can always go back and watch there. But what I'll do when I send out the link, I'll send out Ellie's links as well that she had posted here. And I'm going to send out a link to an upcoming breathwork class as well. So you'll be getting a bit of information in your email box tomorrow, because this is definitely one to watch again. And I love the simple tips, but backed up by research, and all the research you've done is backed up by science.
Mhm.
And so important, this circadian rhythm bit. We've gotten so far away from that, and it's created
We just,
so much
the
havoc.
bottom line when I read some of this stuff is like, we think we're above biology, right? Because we got all these fancy tools and roads and cars and technology, but actually we're still biological organisms, and our bodies just work better when we, I'll say, follow the rules.
Yeah. And Madeline did have a question whether she can have her herbal tea tonight. Is that
Absolutely.
considered a calorie? And
It's
I
not-
think that's an A-okay.
It's A-okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, you go
The
ahead.
sleepy time tea.
I'm going to do that too.
Thanks so much,
Thanks, Ellie.
everybody. Great questions.
Take care. Thank you so
Yeah.
much. Bye, Ellie.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
great.
Bye,
We will
Madeline.
wrap it up there then. Thanks, Ellie.
Okay.
Thanks for everybody for being here, for participating, and all your great questions. So have a good sleep tonight and set those circadian clocks. And thanks for the app.
Yeah, you're
if
welcome.
you need help.
Okay, bye,
All right.
everybody.
Good night,
Thanks.
everyone.
Bye-bye. Good night.